So in my opinion, when we talk about Operation Sindoor, it has been nothing short of a tactical brilliance.
Let's look at it this way. Pakistan knew that there is going to be an Indian retaliation to Pahalgam.
Pakistan still has got a large fleet of F-16s. Now F-16s close to around 70 to 75 which are operational at any point of time.
A long time there has been this myth that India could never use the conventional option against Pakistan because of the nuclear umbrella or the nuclear backdrop, and India could never climb this escalation ladder. I think that myth has been broken by the Modi government.
बची खुदी जमीन को भी मिट्टी में मिलाने का समय आ गया है.
A lot has been spoken about Turkey's role and the Bayraktar drones that they have provided. But we also have to keep in mind that when it comes to Pakistan's ability to procure weapons from Turkey.
So US stopping to provide spare parts.
Yes, US has stopped providing any of the spare parts. So the spare parts are coming from Turkey.
If we say that it is the Pakistani deep state which is responsible for nurturing, sponsoring and training terrorists, why do we make a difference between the non-state actors and the Pakistani military? That tomorrow we will take POK back and we are going to have this Akhand Bharat back.
So tactically speaking, it's a big win for the armed forces. A new threshold has been set. A new doctrine has been brought out to fight state-sponsored terrorism. But I do have my concerns with the eventual outcome, especially the diplomatic implications.
What exactly happened in Operation Sindoor? This was different from what we did in Uri. This was different from Balakot. There was something magical about this Operation Sindoor, which is still ongoing. Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. In response to the gruesome Pahalgam attack, the brave Jawans of the Indian Armed Forces launched Operation Sindoor, targeting the terror camps in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. In response, the Pakistani military retaliated and escalated the matter. After a few days of intense fighting on both sides, there was an agreement, there was an understanding, and both sides agreed to de-escalate the matter. What US President calls a ceasefire was announced. You may have watched a lot of videos on this topic, but I must tell you that you may have a lot of doubts on your minds, lots of unanswered questions, and today in this podcast, you will find answers to every single question that is running on your mind. Joining me today are our two educators with decades of experience in conflict analysis, Chetan sir and Mukesh sir. Welcome to this analysis. Chetan sir, let's start with you. What is your take on Operation Sindoor and the aftermath?
I think Operation Sindoor was a necessary response from India. A response to deter Pakistan from launching such dastardly terror attacks. And if you look at the overall outcome of Operation Sindoor, I think it's a big tactical victory for the Indian Armed Forces. Because we have clearly established a new threshold when it comes to using our military option, which is our conventional option for a sub-conventional warfare that Pakistan has been waging. So when I say sub-conventional warfare, I'm referring to Pakistan's usage of non-state actors, using terrorism in an asymmetrical fashion against India. For a long time, there has been this myth that India could never use the conventional option against Pakistan because of the nuclear umbrella or the nuclear backdrop, and India could never climb this escalation ladder. I think that myth has been broken by the Modi government, and full credit to the government and the armed forces who have carefully, in a calibrated manner, escalated this conflict to impose a cost on Pakistan. So tactically speaking, it's a big win for the armed forces. A new threshold has been set. A new doctrine has been brought out to fight state-sponsored terrorism. But I do have my concerns with the eventual outcome, especially the diplomatic implications. I think it's a strategic loss, if I can call it, given the way in which US played a role, apparently, though India says that this was largely bilateral, the ceasefire which was called. But it's quite evident that the US did play a decisive role, and India has allowed that to happen. And more importantly, the symbolic nature in it was done. Trump tweeting about it, letting the world know and taking credit for that, even before India-Pakistan had made a statement on that. That looks very bad in front of the international community. It eventually brings back the hyphenation between India-Pakistan, which India had achieved after a long time, the de-hyphenation that we had achieved. And it puts India-Pakistan at the same footing. If you look at Trump's post, he calls both India-Pakistan as great nations. And at this time, we expected Trump to criticize Pakistan and pull out Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism. That has not happened. And this eventually could internationalize the Kashmir issue. And we have seen that again with Trump saying that I will mediate over the Kashmir issue. So strategically, I think involvement of a third party, this goes against our stated principle of not involving a third actor between India and Pakistan. So strategically, there are implications for our foreign policy interests, for our internal security interests, but tactically, it was a big win for the armed forces.
We'll discuss all these points one by one, but your initial thoughts, Mukesh sir.
So in my opinion, when we talk about Operation Sindoor, it has been nothing short of a tactical brilliance. And as Chetan sir also talked about it, we have redefined the threshold. What is it that we can tolerate and where is it that we operate? It has also indicated coming of age of our military systems, and by hitting Pakistan deep inside their territory, damaging the infrastructure, the necessary military militia infrastructure which breeds terrorists so much. So that is where we have sent a very clear message. And we have also exposed the limitations of the Pakistani warfare fighting capabilities. But at the same time, this particular operation has also brought about certain learnings and certain areas where not only we have improved, but there's a lot of scope for further improvement and development. So as the discussion goes ahead, we will talk about it. But then yes, the very aspect of Pakistan agreeing and in fact the global community agreeing.
Lack of consistency, declining motivation, fear of answer writing. These are the challenges that civil services aspirants face daily. To handhold serious candidates, make them mains ready, and inculcate discipline in their preparation, we have launched a path-breaking online classroom program called Unacademy PLATINUM. This is your one-stop destination to crack IAS in first attempt, where India's top educators will be guiding and mentoring you personally. I'm here to invite you to experience Unacademy PLATINUM for free. Register for the free experience session now, and together, let's crack it.
That any further act of terrorism will be taken as an act of war. That is in a way redefining of the entire theater in South Asia. And that is something which talks about recalibration of India's policy towards Pakistan. So that in a way is a key takeaway from this Operation Sindoor.
Both my friends, your understanding of conflict is not coming from following the television news channels in India or Pakistan. You have a much nuanced and thorough understanding of the conflict. And I want now you to engage with each other and tell us, and through us tell the audience, what exactly happened in Operation Sindoor. This was different from what we did in Uri. This was different from Balakot. There was something magical about this Operation Sindoor, which is still ongoing. What was that difference?
I think if you look at the scale at which the operations were carried out, if you compare this with, let's say, Balakot airstrikes, that was a one-off strike at one specific target. But this time, India decided to open up multiple fronts, hitting targets from Bahawalpur to Muridke to POK, and a total of 9 targets, both in Pakistan and POK. That itself sends out a very strong message, a strong signal to Pakistan that India will not hesitate to breach Pakistan's sovereignty when there are terror attacks against India. So as Mukesh sir said, an act of terror would be treated as an act of war, and that would be a valid, legitimate reason for India to strike at Pakistan.
No, this is something that our audience already knows. Tell us something that the audience is confused about. What exactly happened? This is considered to be one of the biggest military exercises between the two countries, right, or for that matter, in the entire region in decades.
I think for that, we need to discuss the operational details, the tactical details of the operation.
In fact,
and what is your source of the information?
So the sources come from various different operational intelligence sites which are there, which have an open source citing from the satellite information. Military analysts like one of the very great military analysts that we have in our country, Lieutenant General H.S. Panag. So like that, you have military analysts across the globe who are studying these in greater detail. And here I would want to indicate one of the key successes that we achieved in Operation Sindoor. Because we have to understand, everybody knows this, that Pahalgam attack was in a way instigated by Pakistan to gauge India's response. because Pakistan was very used to the fact that our response will be something that they can tolerate. Their air defenses were up in operation. They knew that Bawalpur and Muridke can be a site which can be targeted by India. So, despite all the radar systems, air defense systems which were in place, we managed to infiltrate those and we managed to hit where it hurts and where we meant to indicate a damage. It was not like a wayward escalation what Pakistan did on 8th of night and followed by the 9th. But we had precise idea about where we have to hit. So that also tells you of coming of age of our intel system, intel gathering system. So if you could see the initial press briefings, there was a list of multiple of these terrorist hubs. 9 of them were targeted. Now choosing those areas where there was active human intelligence, which was indicated that this is where the terrorists are present as of now. So that is a real-time information gathering which India had lacked for a very long period of time. So that indicates our operational prowess, that indicates our military prowess, and also the weapon systems that we have used. Now, when we talk about the weapon systems, now all the weapon systems are the standoff weapons, where you don't necessarily need to infiltrate into Pakistani airspace to carry out the damage. Now, there has always been a kind of a reservation from the military strategists and analysts that how effective will these weapons be? Maybe you fire a missile here and your target basically is some military complex or some terrorist hub.
But it is misdirected.
It is misdirected. It falls on the civilian area. That is what Pakistan was relying upon. That is the reason why Pakistan housed those terrorist complexes well within the population. But we managed to hit precisely. So
it is because of the ammunition that we used with precision. So what you're saying is that after Uri, Pakistan got a response in the form of surgical strike. After Pulwama, there was a Balakot strike. So Pakistan knew that this was something which is coming. So Pakistan knew that Bahawalpur, Muridke would be attacked. So they would have prepared for it. Even then, you managed to infiltrate and you managed to attack with precision, with ammunition, without causing collateral damage.
Absolutely. And in fact, you see the deployment.
And hitting non-military targets, which would mean that our response was non-escalatory in matter.
Yes, we did not want to escalate it. If we are forced upon, we can escalate it. That is also again something that India showed following the 8th and the 9th of skirmishes. And we have to understand that the deployment of the new Chinese air defense systems across the region of Lahore and activation of the modern, so-called modern radar systems taken from China, that was in a way to counter India's attack around the region of Muridke. But then we managed to, in a way, destroy those almost immediately and almost at our will. So that also defeats the entire purpose of having those Chinese munitions and indicates a kind of a military superiority that we have gained in search of.
Can you also tell us about the skirmishes, the dogfight which took place, where more than 100 planes were involved?
I think we need to discuss what happened on the night of 7th, early in the morning. What we have heard, and which has been verified by a lot of analysts and experts as well, is that this was probably the biggest air battle which has taken place in modern times. Probably around 80 fighter jets, including AWACS systems, were up from the Indian side. Around at least 40 aircraft from the Pakistani side were up in the air, waiting for the Indian attack. Because as soon as the Indian fighters were scrambled and they were sent in different packages, because 9 distributed targets were targeted. I mean, they were spread out geographically. So what we can say is that there were different strike packages that were sent out, along with combat air patrols, so that if there is a Pakistani attack, a separate package would defend the strike, whereas the strike units would proceed to deliver the standoff weapons. So this would be the largest network-centric warfare environment that we have seen in a long time. So this is a true test of India's technological prowess as well.
And in fact, across the world, in no other theater that you can recall in the recent times has there been such a large-scale deployment of beyond visual range air-to-air missiles. So you have the PL-15E, which is the air-to-air missile of China, which was deployed by the Pakistanis. And in case of our own systems, we have been working on these air-to-air missiles, the BVR systems indigenously as well. And there have been learnings from Balakot, where one of our MiGs was taken down. So there have been learnings, and this also indicates that when it comes to the BVR deployment, yes, we have taken losses, clearly, as the press conference also indicated of the DGMOs, that there have been losses, but that is something which is expected in a combat situation. That is something you have to count in. But despite that, suppressing the enemy fire in such a way that Pakistan Air Force did not get deployed on 8th or 9th. So think about it, that what happened on 7th was so massive and so traumatizing for the Pakistan Air Force that after that what happened on 8th and 9th was done by few of the quadcopters or few of the missile launches that they did. They never had any of the airplanes up in the air. And we managed to down some of the very high-tech platforms that they have with unconfirmed reports about F-16, etc. So we won't go into the unconfirmed report territory.
But okay, sir, since you mentioned PL-15, there's one very interesting report which has come up. One of the PL-15s which was fired, it has been recovered in a good
Intact
condition,
manner.
intact
Right,
condition.
yes.
Right.
Now, this is a big win, not just for India, for the West. The West is very interested because this is the first time we'll get a look at a Chinese BVRM.
That is so stunning about this entire conflict.
Yeah.
Maybe for the first time in the last 4 decades that we can see Chinese weaponry ammunition being put to test against the established European and Western platforms.
So
this was the first testing times.
These European companies, the American defense companies, they're looking at this conflict as a test bed of Chinese weapons, how they perform against Western systems. So this has global implications.
But it will work wonderfully for us as well.
Yeah.
We have to keep in mind that of all the various countries in the world that China threatens or who feel threatened by China, we are the only large power which shares a large boundary with China. China is our neighbor. Yeah. So these BVR systems, etc., that is something that China has been threatening us for a long period of time by establishing the high altitude air bases around the region of Tibet. And whenever the skirmishes break out in the region of Arunachal or let's suppose in the theater of Ladakh, China always boasts about the capabilities of its BVR systems. Now, when these BVR systems are there in our
You already
land,
have the knowledge of how to
yes,
respond
so
to them.
we can also work upon our own counter deployment. Yeah. And very important part of the air warfare is and the dogfighting abilities is electronic countermeasures. So that is why no country wants their missile systems to be intact. Even if it falls in enemy territory, they would want it to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So that you cannot develop a countermeasure. Now we have the opportunity to develop those countermeasures and deploy it on our, let's suppose even a simple platform like a Tejas Mark 1 or a Tejas Mark 2, which you don't expect it to be a frontline fighter jet. But if the electronic countermeasures are deployed, they can be very potent force across the entire theater in the northern command.
In fact, countries are so guarded about their military secrets that when weapon systems are found intact, especially countries like US, they send special extraction teams to extract it from the conflict zone or destroy it over there, because that would lead to the leakage of sensitive technologies.
The Osama bin Laden raid,
yeah,
where one of the
helicopters crashed
stealth
and
helicopters,
they destroyed it.
They destroyed it. It could not take. It had some technical malfunction.
Could not take off.
Could not take off. But US basically detonated the explosives there itself and destroyed it. And mind you, even after US destroying this, there were credible news reports about China still extracting what was left out of it to understand the aspect of the stealth material, to understand where carbon fiber is used. Now, these are very significant advantages in your own development of the weapon system as well, and what to expect from the enemy. To understand, when I say what to expect out of enemy, every country has got their own trajectory of development of weapon systems. For example, when we talk about Aakash, they have their own sort of electronic warfare suites as well as the countermeasures, etc. So that trajectory you understand. So the further development of PL-15 that China will do, we will have an idea that in which path are they taking those BVR missiles. So that is a big advantage.
I think the conflict on 7th was very critical because of this reason. A big face-off between Indian Air Force and Pakistani Air Force with Chinese and Western weapons. So that establishes the credibility of the weapon platforms as well. And India's ability to take down air defenses. To penetrate and breach the air defense. I'm talking on 7th as well. The missile strikes that were carried out on the terror camps.
And here I would also point out that since the time of Balakot, we have developed a new array of weapon systems like the Rudram missile. Yeah. Now, the Rudram missile system is primarily developed to target the radar systems and the kind of air defense systems. Mind you, those were not deployed. Those are still in production and developmental phases. So the technological edge that any adversary would want, India has that technological advantage. And that is something that you could see subsequently on 8th of night as well, where Pakistan deployed swarms of drones But eventually, once those drones were being taken down by our air defense, that was very demoralizing. And here, I think both of us...
For our audience, why demoralizing?
Because you see, when you fire any weapon or a projectile or a missile to an enemy territory, you want that to hit the ground, to hit the target. But if all of them are taken out in the air itself, then that becomes demoralizing, that I cannot pack a counterpunch. And on the other hand, the Indian attacks would keep on relentlessly falling on the targets designated. We have to keep in mind that we managed to hit Jacobabad. We managed to hit the Noor Khan Air Base. So that is where that would lead to frustration, and that is why Pakistan threatened to climb up the escalatory ladder by 2 to 3 rungs.
And we also have to keep in mind that S-400 is not the only defense system that we have used in this conflict.
Exactly. It was an integrated counter UAS system, a grid set up by the Army and the Air Force. So both have air defense assets. So S-400 has not been primarily deployed in this combat, because you don't use a multi-million-dollar weapon to take down a cheap Chinese toy drone. Because on 8th and 9th, what Pakistan did was primarily, it was testing our air defense. They are trying to pull out our air defense systems, find out the locations, so that they can then unleash a seed operation, as we call it, where you suppress enemy air defenses. So that is preparation for a larger invasion. Generally, this is a standard procedure in any combat where you take down enemy air defenses so that then you can make a territorial incursion.
This would also have given a signal to the policy makers, the analysts, that this is something that is serious coming from Pakistan. They want to escalate the matters.
Exactly.
They want to find out where the air defense system is.
Right. And also, I think the public also had this misconception that the bigger escalation happened on 8th and 9th, but that's not actually correct. On 8th and 9th, Pakistan was using very low-grade weapon systems like toy drones and cheap quadcopters. The idea was also psychological warfare. Imagine firing 300, 400 projectiles across sectors from Baramulla all the way till Sir Creek. So this has a psychological impact on the Indian masses, especially in the border areas. The media will amplify it, and you know how Indian media works. They would blow it out of proportion. So this has a psychological impact. So the Indian forces did very well. The integrated counter-UAS grid performed phenomenally well. So it was not just the S-400, it was primarily the Barak and the Aakash, which formed the mid-tier of the air defense systems. And for the lower end of the drone, the cheaper drones, we have primarily used the L-70 anti-aircraft guns, the other Russian origin aircraft guns.
And also, in fact, we were able to take down a lot of them by the snipers themselves.
Snipers as well.
The Garud commandos, they took down a lot of these with the help of the sniper weapons.
And a lot of non-kinetic options were used,
yes,
where you jam the GPS signal or the radio frequencies.
Yes. So that tells you of also coming of age of our own ballistic missile defense system and the overall air defense system. We have been working on it for, I think, post-Kargil, ever since the Kargil conflict and the Kargil war. You could see that India has been developing this air defense at multiple layers. We have taken the Israeli help as well, and this was the first time that a Barak system was deployed in South Asia with success. And that, in a way, saved multiple damages that could have been caused on our cities. So clearly that adds to the frustration level of the Pakistanis.
We have seen multiple weapon systems, new weapon systems being deployed in actual combat for the first time. I think Aakash has proved its creditworthiness.
Formidable.
Yeah, formidable. And this increases the export potential. Armenia has already bought Aakash, and there are many other countries, Egypt, Indonesia.
I'm going to talk about Armenia and how can we bring in Azerbaijan to this conflict as well. But explore the role played by Turkey, China in this conflict. Can we say that in this conflict, although everybody in the world send their condolences to the dastardly attack which was carried out in Pahalgam, but then none of the countries stood with us and appreciated the response that we gave to Pakistan in Operation Sindoor. Everybody was talking about de-escalation and not recognizing our right in self-defense.
I think that could be possibly due to the nuclear escalation which might happen, which every country would be worried about. They would want the tensions to tone down immediately. They would want the hostilities to stop. And let's say you look at this from perspective of each country or each region. Europe would be less interested because historically they've had a pro-Pakistan bias. And now they have an issue with India's position on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Yeah.
If India takes an independent stand and sides with Russia, why would they openly support India? So except for France, I don't think any other European power has firmly stood with India. So it could be because of that. And Pakistan has these reliable all-weather partners. Like you mentioned, China, Turkey, to an extent Azerbaijan as well. And there are various reasons why they back Pakistan. For China, it's a strategy. China is like, for China, Pakistan is a proxy. as
like
they say,
a vassal state.
enemy is a friend. So this relationship has,
And in the modern era, nobody offers their land. In the post-colonial era and post-imperial era, nobody simply offers you their land and the entire sovereignty.
Ironclad friend.
Ironclad friend, the heights of the mountains and the depth of the oceans.
Yeah.
The friendship is more stronger than
Right.
that. But we also have to understand that when it comes to the role of Turkey, a lot has been spoken about Turkey's role and the Bayraktar drones that they have provided. But we also have to keep in mind that when it comes to Pakistan's ability to procure weapons from Turkey, it is restricted. And that was seen on 8th of night. Because, mind you, all the narrative which Pakistan was building, and it was a carefully woven narrative which Pakistan was building, that the Turkish ships are coming in. The six.
So the war was also fought on the psychological lines.
Absolutely. Psychological warfare that Chetan sir has said has been an important part of warfare. If you go back maybe 7-8 centuries, India did that very successfully during the 1971 war. Now, these Bayraktar drones, even though they are cheap, if Turkey would have had an endless supply of them, Pakistan would not have resorted to deploying quadcopters. So obviously they had their own limitations. Only China is one of those countries which will keep on supplying the weapon systems, because for them, Pakistan is a test bed.
Yeah.
Let them fight till kingdom come may or till eternity, and they will get better at these weapon deployment. They will learn from it when it comes to India. So the only way in which Pakistan can keep on procuring those kind of weapon systems is from China, by taking more debt. Why Pakistan is very dependent on Turkey is because we have to understand that Pakistan still has got a large fleet of F-16s. Now, F-16s close to around 70 to 75, which are operational at any point of time. If we take the operational ratio of F-16, it is around 60%. So you have 60% of F-16s which are ready to fly at any point of time.
So US stopping to provide
has
spare
stopped-
parts.
Yes, US has stopped providing any of the spare parts. So the spare parts are coming from Turkey when it comes to the modern F-16 jets, etc. The integration of weapon systems with the F-16, that is something, the coding, etc. has to be provided by Turkey. So that is why Pakistan is excessively dependent on Turkey.
and also Turkey has made significant progress in its defense indigenous industry, especially the drone industry.
Drones, air warfare.
Yeah,
Same with Azerbaijan as well. Bayraktar drones are manufactured in Azerbaijan as well.
but it's a
With a
Turkish
different-
company. Bayraktar
Yes.
is a Turkish company. But there are no reports of Pakistan using Bayraktar drones in this conflict because they're slightly more expensive. What Pakistan has used is the Songar drones from
Yes,
Turkey again,
Turkey.
but very cheap.
Cheap.
Yeah.
So they have a very limited amount of money that they can spend. And we have to understand that whatever issues that lie in our military system in terms of capital acquisition, capital expenditure, we have a limitation because our revenue expenditure in terms of pension salaries is very high. The same thing goes in Pakistan military as well. They might have a budget of $10 billion for the military spending, but they have a limited amount of money that they can procure newer weapons. One thing that Pakistan military has got a slight amount of agility is their ability to take quick decisions and a turnaround, because everything is centered around the chief of army staff. So they have been known to pivot and be very innovative at the same time. And that innovation was something which was on show on 8th of night.
Right.
And that is where I think our deployment and our counteraction across the airfields in Lahore, the disability or the way in which we completely annihilated the air defense system, that sent a message. And that again forced Pakistan's hand. But what was the final straw was what happened on 9th. On 9th, when again Pakistan deployed the same tactics, this time we selected the airfields. Think about it, from Skardu all the way till Karachi. And if anybody takes a look at the airbase at Jacobabad was a very important airfield when you had the US invasion of Afghanistan. It has always been very important, very close to the CPEC. Now, in order to reach Jacobabad, you have to almost cross the entire territory of Pakistan. Our missiles went there without being defeated by the air defense systems.
Right.
So that is where Pakistan resorted to the threat that now we are going to deploy the ballistic missiles that we have.
Or the Noor Khan base,
Noor
which
Khan
is
base,
considered
the
to be the
strike-
stronghold of the Pakistani army.
And
It is
where it
Islamabad.
is also believed that Pakistan has some of its nuclear assets.
Nuclear assets.
Right.
And don't forget the location. It's around the suburbs of Rawalpindi.
Yeah.
So the strike was right at the heart of the Pakistani
Pakistani
military
army.
establishment. Yeah.
Noor Khan, other than Sargodha,
Yeah.
is one of the most important
Important.
airfields that Pakistan has.
And which was always considered as if it is impregnable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hitting Noor Khan means you are hitting Islamabad.
Yeah.
very close to the vicinity of Islamabad and Rawalpindi, and the news reports which are pouring in is the fact that Pakistan is mulling over the fact that whether to shift the operational center for the Chief of Army Staff away from Rawalpindi. So think about the amount of intimidation that the strike at Noor Khan has achieved. So that is where I think the operational prowess, the war gaming that Indian military has been doing, and mind you, all this without actively deploying our carrier battle groups.
Yes.
And that is a significant amount of advantage that India has.
Lack of consistency, declining motivation, fear of answer writing. These are the challenges that civil services aspirants face daily. To handhold serious candidates, make them mains ready, and inculcate discipline in their preparation, we have launched a path-breaking online classroom program called Unacademy Platinum. This is your one-stop destination to crack IAS in first attempt, where India's top educators will be guiding and mentoring you personally. I'm here to invite you to experience Unacademy Platinum for free. Register for the free experience session now, and together, let's crack it.
A great power differential. In terms of Air Force, we don't have that great a power differential. But this skirmish indicated that we indeed have a technological prowess and a technological superiority. But when it comes to Navy, the delta is huge.
Yeah.
And our ability to deploy naval assets in that short area of southern Pakistan border, that was something which was very apparent in terms of the fact that none of the Pakistani naval assets could leave the shore and harbor.
And also talking about the airstrikes which happened on 9th, where India hit these air bases, reports indicate that India might have employed the BrahMos, the aerial variant of the BrahMos launched through fighter jets, most likely the Sukhois. So this is again a significant development. BrahMos has seen its first combat, and this has great export potential again. And it also sends a message across to Pakistan. The precision of the BrahMos, the speed at which it travels, it's a supersonic missile which travels at Mach 3. So Pakistani air defense is absolutely worthless against these weapon systems. So,
and in fact, if you can talk about it, that how in terms of all the cruise missiles which are being deployed across the globe, from the Tomahawks for 3 decades back till today, you will still find that BrahMos is one of the most potent weapons anywhere across the world in terms of the precision, in terms of its ability not to be killed in air. So BrahMos is as potent a platform that any country can get, and we have that.
And let's not forget, it's a joint venture between India and Russia.
India and Russia. And in fact, I would argue, we were talking about it the other day, that Russia's deployment of BrahMos in Ukraine was not that effective as compared to how we managed to deploy it.
Right.
So that also tells us about owning of that technological prowess, which is very important.
And I think China would be watching this very closely, because BrahMos is something that has worried Chinese defense planners. But they were comfortable with the fact that the range of Indian BrahMos was restricted to 290 kilometers. That was because of India not being a member of MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime. So since we became a member in 2016, now we have no restrictions. We have extended the range, which can easily strike Chinese targets.
Now it is up till 850 kilometers. And mind you, in the case of the Chinese theater, the air is rarefied. It is at an altitude.
Right. So the Tibetan plateau.
Yes. So automatically the range extends by almost 20 to 30%. So which can hit their airfields, which is in the hinterlands of the Tibetan highland.
Right.
So that would definitely have sent shivers down the Chinese spine.
And talking about China's role, India has always worried about the possibility of a two-front war. I don't think it's a futuristic threat. I think we are already there, because there have been reports that when India mounted these strikes on the 9th using the BrahMos, there have been verifiable reports through open source intelligence that there was attempt from China engaging in electronic warfare, trying to jam the signals on the Indian side to help the Pakistani side. This is very disturbing if it is proven true.
And what do you make of these, although unconfirmed reports, but Balochistan Liberation Army and the front also raising its head and attacking the Pakistani security forces?
I think it's more than a coincidence, because right when Operation Sindoor was going on, to see so many attacks in the Baloch region where BLA targeted Pakistani military establishment, and these were repeated attacks. And if you look at the pattern of the attacks as well, there has been a certain gap. If you look at the last few months, the BLA has been subdued. Apart from the Jafar Express attack, Pakistan has been able to crush the BLA movement. So for suddenly the BLA to get activated and they've almost killed 20 to 30 Pakistani soldiers. So this is a big development, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
And Pakistan is very touchy about
Very touchy
Balochistan.
about it.
Let's not forget the speech or the
Yes.
infamous speech that the General Asim Munir gave. It was in response to the Jafar attacks.
Yes.
While
And even
talking to the
TTP
expats.
went active all of a sudden in Peshawar. There were a few TTP-led attacks, which maybe lends credence to Pakistan's argument that India could be behind.
And you also have to understand this indicates how thinly spread the Pakistani defense forces are. I mean, prior to the Pahalgam, almost all the Pakistani forces were deployed on their western theatre, western front, boundary with Afghanistan, Iran, and Pakistan has been involved in skirmishes with the Iranian Air Force as well. So as soon as this eastern theatre or the eastern front opens, all the troops have to be deployed to the eastern front, and that leaves them very vulnerable in the region of Balochistan, in the region of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So while we keep on talking about the two-front situation in India, we have to understand that the enemy state in this case is much more vulnerable than us. We can still have, and if we talk about our air defenses or our entire military asset across the northern theatre, across the eastern theatre, like Hashimara, like Tezpur, they were not deployed. It was only our strike corps across the western front, from north to the region around Gujarat, that was deployed. And none of their attacks could even cross the region of Rajasthan, right? So the bordering areas were where all the projectiles were taken down. So we are still in a much more comfortable situation as compared to what they are. But at the same time, this indicates the importance of having a technological prowess. That technological prowess we have a power differential. But going ahead into the future, over the next 5 to 7 years, that technological prowess needs to be developed furthermore so that Pakistan feels India is completely out of reach in terms of any attack that they can mount.
And I also think because of the aerial component of Operation Sindoor, most of the attention focus has been on the drone warfare, the air defense systems. And this has unfortunately reduced the attention on what happened in Jammu and Kashmir sector. The heavy artillery, shelling, the damage that Poonch in particular has suffered is immense. How border villages, civilians were targeted, places of worship have been targeted. So I think that is something which needs to be...
There I think we suffer from a problem of proximity. When I say problem of proximity, the regions are very close to each other. I mean, a stone throw distance.
Across the LOC.
Yeah, so even if a projectile is deployed, there is very little amount of time, fraction of seconds for you to be able to counter that. So that is why our LOCs, the region around LOC and even IB, they suffer a lot of damage. There also, we have started developing some of the modern radar systems which locate the position of the weapon. And that has been deployed in this warfare as well, where once the location where the weapon is being fired, that is triangulated, then you pulverize that. But in the meantime, the sad losses
the damage would be done.
Yeah, that damage.
So we have discussed a lot about Operation Sindoor, all the technicalities, how the Air Force played a fantastic role despite not using the services of the Navy, and how the Army was fighting along the line of control. But now let's look at the impact. Let's do a critical analysis of Operation Sindoor. Do you think that it is a credible deterrent, that Pakistan would be deterred from launching an attack such as it carried out in Pahalgam?
I think it is. At least for some time, for some years to come, this would be a very strong deterrent. Because if you go back to Pulwama, the Balkot airstrikes India carried out, it was a one-off strike. And this one-off strike, which was just like a trailer, was sufficient to deter Pakistani deep state from launching big attacks against India. I agree there have been few minor attempts made in Jammu and Kashmir particularly, but we haven't seen a large-scale attack which is directly coming from the Pakistani soil. So I think this recent escalation which India has carried out under Operation Sindoor, this has been on a completely different level. We have shown the willingness to climb the escalation ladder. We have opened up multiple fronts, multiple sectors, hit Pakistani state targets as well, the military targets deep at Rawalpindi and other targets like Mukesh sir pointed out. So this would be a strong deterrent.
So you're saying it would act as a deterrent. There is a lot of question on the minds of the citizens. If we say that it is the Pakistani deep state which is responsible for nurturing, sponsoring and training terrorists, why do we make a difference between the non-state actors and the Pakistani military? The Operation Sindoor, when we launched, and then the press briefing that we did, we explicitly said that it was non-escalatory nature.
Yeah.
That means we did not hit the military targets. whereas it is the Pakistani military which is responsible for nurturing and sponsoring the terrorists. Why make this difference?
This is due to international legal implications. If you look at the UN Charter, Article 2 of UN Charter states that no UN member state should violate the sovereignty of the other country. But there is only one exception.
But that does not apply in case you are acting in self-defense.
So I'll come to the self-defense point. The only exception is self-defense, which is Article 51. And for self-defense, you need to have a excessive use of armed force from the other state, which has not happened in this case. Clearly, the attack is from non-state actors. So here, there is a legal gray area which exists. The US has been pushing a doctrine to use the self-defense doctrine, even
they used it in Afghanistan?
Afghanistan, yes. The US has justified its actions in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, other countries by invoking the self-defense doctrine. And also there is a doctrine of unwilling or unable. Let's say a state is unwilling to act against terrorists or unable to act against terrorists. Still you can invoke the right to self-defense and strike a target.
There is a Caroline doctrine as well,
yeah,
which was used by the US.
So India is keeping the legal implications in mind because you need to attribute the attack. We may have some evidence linking the terrorists with Pakistani deep state, but will it be accepted by the UN? Because under Article 51, if you're invoking right to self-defense, you have to submit a report to the UNSC. Brief all the UNSC members as well. And then UNSC
which we have been doing right from the time of the Pahalgam attack.
But there is a possibility UNSC could consider resolution as well. And that could lead to further implications, further UN involvement, which India doesn't want. That's why the Foreign Secretary was very careful. If you observe, we never invoked Article 51, but we fulfilled all the criteria. We attributed the attack to Pakistan. We briefed the UNSC members.
So the military bases were targeted only when Pakistan retaliated. And sided with the terrorists and attacked the military bases in India.
Yes, India was very clear that our attacks are proportionate. That Pakistan carried out the first escalation, that was Pahalgam attack. Then we carried out the strikes on terror camps only.
Then Pakistani military retaliated, escalated, and then we responded proportionately to these escalations.
Yeah. And this is allowed under international.
And you also have to understand the basic question that you asked, that why is it that we, despite the clear-cut establishment between the military and the terrorists, why don't we directly attack the military? We have to understand that is exactly what Pakistan wants. Pakistan wants this to escalate to a level of full-fledged war. Anyways, it is a basket economy, it is a basket case. It doesn't have its own growth story or any economic story for that matter. So it wants to galvanize the public opinion against and unite the public opinion against one common adversary, that is India. We don't want that. So one of the terms which has come out quite prominently in this entire dispute is the case of Offramp. So India does not want to trap Pakistan in a corner and make Pakistan use all the tactics. We are very mindful of the fact that, see, even though this dispute lasted for 3 to 4 days, the number of flight cancellations, the number of tourists...
We have more to lose than they.
We have much more to lose. We have a goal that of what is stated by the government of Viksit Bharat by 2047. We cannot allow that to get derailed. That is something that if you take the time back to around 2001 when you had, and 2002 when you had Operation Parakram, it was called off because the economy felt a lot of pressure during those 2 months itself.
More than 100 deaths even without a bullet being fired.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And look at the stock markets as well.
Markets reacted very differently at that point of time. And look at the markets now
after the ceasefire.
They are absolutely joyous because there is an inherent belief that now that China is getting into that tariff war and the tariff trade, so that is where India...
Then how do you look? Don't you think the political class in India is also raising the expectations of the public, wherein every now and then you will hear leaders of political parties talking about taking back Pakistan-occupied Kashmir? I think the common public would be disappointed with this ceasefire or understanding because the expectations were set very high, that tomorrow we will take POK back and we are going to have this Akhand Bharat back.
Yes.
How do you then calm the expectations of the public?
So, you see, what you said, I agree with that there has been a clear cut of...
The expectation is that Pakistani state is like Pakistan cricket team. Yes. And we are going to defeat them every single time.
And in fact, you have to keep one thing in mind of all the various kinetic warfare disputes which are going on across the world. Nowhere is the power differential as less as compared to between India and Pakistan. We are still talking about one of the militaries which comes in the top 10 of the firepower. The Air Force, which is quite innovative. So, yes,
you're talking about Pakistani Air Force.
Pakistan. So, yes, there has been a case of clear-cut jingoism.
So, long story short, Pakistani Army Air Force is not same as that of Pakistani cricket team.
Yeah, you can't be complicit. They are a formidable force. In fact, several veterans as well, they acknowledge the innovative tactics of the Pakistani Air Force right from 1965. Yes, IAF has had an upper hand, but still it's something you need to acknowledge. You need to know your enemy.
And you also have to keep in mind, ever since the 1965 war, every war that you take a look into, Pakistan Air Force has had better platforms.
True.
Technologically superior platforms as compared to what Indian Air Force has. We have had to make do with the limitations that we had. For example, during Kargil, there was a lot of limitation in terms of how the air power would be used because we could not cross the LOC. Pakistan has got no such reservations at all. So the amount of money that they spend absolutely on the modern platforms that they can buy, steal, borrow, beg from anywhere, but they keep it as a fighting force only targeted towards India.
How do you respond to the public criticism or sentiment that this was the right time to take back Pakistan occupied Kashmir? Should it be taken back?
I don't adhere to that kind of a public sentiment that you take POK back. Not in terms of what the sentimentality around it is associated. Yes, that is a land that we say is our land. But we have to understand that as of now, as of the presence and the present economic and military might that we have, we will face a lot of losses in that case. And that would also put India in a bad light when it comes to the international community and the international entire Committee of Nations. You also have to keep in mind the case where you take the case of Russia and Ukraine. Now, Russia is a much more formidable kind of an opponent as compared to Ukraine.
But Ukraine is supported by almost the entire Europe as well as United States.
And Ukraine has been able to resist.
Right?
Because in 2022, I still remember, most analysts were expecting that
Within days.
within
Within
days
days.
Ukraine would fall.
Yeah.
And they've stood. They've
Something
even
like they
regained
did with Crimea.
Crimea. Yeah.
So
And
in the case of Ukraine, the world stood with that.
Yeah.
But in the case of Pakistan, you have the entire Chinese might which will stand with that. So, and Russia, look at the economy of Russia. It is in shambles now. Just because they have oil, they are able to sustain themselves. Imagine Russia right now without oil.
And even if you take POK back, imagine the cost after that.
after that. And also, let's look at it this way. For any conflict, there has to be an end goal. There has to be a political objective. So, if let's say taking back POK is a political goal, what will you do after that? Will the local population be accepting of Indian administration? Wouldn't that lead to much more severe problems? And would Pakistan take this? I mean, wouldn't it try to breach the nuclear threshold?
Absolutely.
Or wouldn't China get dragged into it? Because China has big investments in POK. And India would be branded as the aggressor. So I don't think
So
it's
rather
reasonable.
than that, what I would always want to see in this region is, see, the end goal, the long-term goal, POK should be integrated with India. We should have the complete territorial integrity. But then, not by force. We are anyways developing at a rate which Pakistan cannot even dream of. The kind of prosperity which Jammu Kashmir has been witnessing in recent times, which you can talk about. So that is something which POK has been denied of. So let us grow to such an extent that it becomes an aspirational goal of people in that region itself, that I want to be associated with that part of Jammu and Kashmir. I don't want to be associated with a country which doesn't give me power, which uses us for exploitative purposes, because there has been statement by the defense minister where he said that all the students who are there in the madrasas, we will deploy them on the front. So you can imagine
Defense Minister of Pakistan.
Defense Minister of Pakistan, obviously. So you can imagine the kind of frustration which even the public would feel. So let this differential grow, and it would definitely grow within the next 5 to 7 years when we are seeing ourselves to be a $7 trillion economy. Pakistan is stagnated at around $200 to $300 billion. Many of our states will have a GDP more than that. So let that situation come. It is not something which has to be attained only in this year. Sadly, what you are talking about is also an outcome of the fact that we are living in an age of social media, where anybody and everybody can be an influencer and can be an opinion provider. So that is where you see people in studios also catering to that. The news channels jumping.
We will talk about the role played by the news channels, particularly the electronic media. But let me direct that question that I asked Chetan sir. Will this Operation Sindoor act as a credible deterrent for Pakistan?
I think so. I think so because clearly we have established a new threshold, and the very consensus on the fact, even when it comes to the level of US, that any future terrorist act will be considered as an act of war. This is a big thing because till now our attacks were limited to the terrorist camps. Now that we have achieved the objective of being able to demonstrate that we can hit you at Bawalpur and Buridke, now our targets will be directly the military installations. And that is something that Pakistan is wary of. No other.
But you were saying just before some time that that is exactly what Pakistan wants.
Yes, but then they are also worried about it. You see, Pakistan wants to climb up the escalation ladder on their own terms.
They are worried about uncontrolled escalation.
Uncontrolled escalation, because understand, why is it that Pakistan was throwing these 300, 400 projectiles over India? They wanted Indian Air Force to be deployed so that they get an opportunity to deploy their Air Force again. But what did we manage to do? At that theater level itself, at the level of these UAVs itself, we had the loitering munitions that Pakistanis could not stop. And one thing that you would have noticed, all the videographies that we have of the attacks and the damages being caused, we have the videographies which are clearly taken from a loitering or a drone, which is
Satellite imagery.
Few of them are satellite imageries, few of them are from drones. So we have had our capabilities and eyes in their sky for some time, despite all the air defenses, despite everything being said about it. So they are clearly wary about it, and that is where I feel it will act as a credible deterrence. But I would also be interested to know that what is your take in this case, that will this really deter Pakistan as a state?
I don't think so, because then Balakot strike would have deterred Pakistan, or the Uri surgical strikes would have deterred Pakistan. You have to look at that Pakistan is an ideological state, and no amount of these kinetic strikes would deter Pakistan, because they would still carry on its agenda. I think, yes, this was required. It's not to defeat the whole purpose of Operation Sindoor, but I think there are other means also which we should consider deploying to target Pakistan where it hurts. For example, there were a lot of cleavages along sectarian lines: bribe, exploit, use diplomatic measures to drive a wedge in Pakistan. One. Second, something that Israel did with the almost 1/5 of the Iranian centrifuges, Stuxnext.
Cyber warfare.
Cyber warfare. That's something that we need to deploy. And I think more damage to Pakistan was done by the IMF sanctions than any of the military actions could have done. In this water treaty, it may not have an impact now, but it will have an impact in the future. That
FATF,
is, I think,
FATF as well
is a big platform.
that's what I was referring to.
Right.
The FATF,
a grey listing by
the grey listing by the FATF. Oh, I mixed it with IMF. So FATF and the IWT, these are strong measures against Pakistan.
And what is your opinion with regards to the region of POK? How should we approach that kind of dilemma?
I think once we had almost reached to an agreement between with the then General Pervez Musharraf, who was then the president of Pakistan, that there were 4 steps which were recommended, although according to various reports that's what was thwarted by the then Home Minister Mr. Advani. Make LOC a permanent border. Let it remain where it is. Let's stay peaceful with our part of.
But that was offered by Bill Clinton during his visit, and to make this LOC an international border. None of the sides were comfortable with it. And we also have to understand that.
No, when you look at track 2 diplomacy or track 1.5 diplomacy, when you get to meet people and talk to people who are involved, there is almost a consensus on both sides that this is something that we can look at the future. In fact, some local political parties in Kashmir also saying that let's convert LOC into a permanent border. And I think that can be a lasting solution.
But I feel better to maintain status quo as of now, given the political sentiment, and leave it for future generations, maybe for the future decades.
No, the more you drag it, the more you're going to pull United States into this. Because one thing that we had achieved till now, unfortunately we've lost it because of this conflict, is the internationalization of Kashmir. Even at the peak of 2019, when the special status was revoked, we didn't see the kind of noises that we are hearing today. Again, as you were talking about the hyphenation of India and Pakistan again, and then President Trump offering to mediate on Jammu and Kashmir, although again we will reject it, but unfortunately the matter has been internationalized. So it's better to put the matter to rest.
There is also a lot of conversation regarding the kind of standard of living in Jammu and Kashmir and the Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Now, that is something that we see playing out on the social media, on the various news channels. What is your take? Is there really a kind of difference in living standards out there which is so huge, or?
Obviously there is a difference.
That is a huge
Obviously,
difference.
but at the same time, you don't have to look at the economic well-being. You have to look at it from a larger humanitarian perspective. That is more critical than land or economy.
Sarwan sir, what do you think about these expectations that have been set by Indian media, by the politicians as well, regarding very strong response against Pakistan, which is almost warmongering? Is this a slippery slope? Because public expectations will have an impact on policy eventually.
That is something that I would always advise the students to switch off the television channels, don't watch them. But that is dangerous.
You have politicians, the Home Minister saying that we should take back POK.
But you are responding to the local domestic rhetoric, and rhetoric is allowed in politics.
Because
but you should not let it go past at such a level that it becomes difficult for you to calm down the tempers of the public. Because what is happening right now is maybe the majority of the people, they're not happy with the ceasefire which was announced.
Yes.
Because the expectation was set completely different.
Different.
That tomorrow we are going to take POK back, then we are going to attack Karachi. Some media channels already claim that Islamabad has been captured.
Karachi port is on fire.
Karachi port is on fire, so we have won. And then when you realize that the reality is completely different, it builds that narrative of subordination. So that is a slippery slope, as you said, very difficult. You can't dismount from the tiger that you're riding.
And again, I think that is an outcome of the social media age. And the best example that you will get of social media demonstrating policy action is if you take a look at US. The very fact that they are talking about that we will make Canada part of US, we will make Greenland a part of US, we'll take Panama as well. That is nothing but playing to the jingoism which goes on in social media. So in that way, when we talk about how we have addressed the situation with experts coming in with the press conference, very measured words which are being spoken, that tells you about a kind of a sanity which prevails. And that is a reassuring factor. But at the same time, I would agree that this rising jingoism, it is like a kind of a slippery slope. It is kind of who falls to the bottom first. And regardless of whosoever comes in power 10 years down the line, we have to understand that there is no going back from our present stance, which is why it is so important and which was very important for India to send such a strong message post Pahalgam.
And one thing that has confused me, if you look at the coverage from the international media, CNN, BBC, suddenly they focused on a new pope. So it is as if this conflict, which was a nuclear flashpoint, it was relegated. And then suddenly, one fine moment, there was again dominance of India-Pakistan conflict. What could have caused that?
If you look at the narrative which has been set, the Western media in general has this bias against India. This is very evident. I mean, be it European media, American media, it has always been there. And you also see a pro-Pakistan inclination. Because if you look at the initial reports which came out after Pahalgam attack, terrorists were referred to as gunmen or militants. And when the conflict started as well, when the escalation happened after Operation Sindoor was launched, the narrative in Western media was largely Pakistan-centric. What Pakistan was saying, what Pakistan did, the propaganda that 5 fighter jets were downed, the propaganda that 25 drones from India were taken down. Whereas the Indian narrative never found space in Western media. And it's not that India was not trying. We had the Indian ambassador in the US giving an interview with CNN, the Indian High Commissioner in London engaging with Sky News and BBC, and India was conducting official press briefings every day. But this would not be given any coverage, any space. I think this is a deliberate ideological bias against India.
This also vindicates the stance that our External Affairs Minister has been taking for the past year and a half, where he has been making the statement at multiple forums across Europe that Europe has to come out of that state where Europe's problem is the world's problem and world's problem doesn't concern Europe. And we see a kind of a similar trajectory, and we have to understand what Chetan has said is absolutely correct. This is not something new. Remember the attack which happened on the Legislative Assembly in Jammu Kashmir? 2001. And this was reported by media houses like BBC as a government installation being hit. Now a government building, you cannot compare it to the Legislative Assembly.
No, that is where the role of the former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, becomes very important, because at least till 2004, 2005, when the world would release the reports related to terrorism and how many people got killed because of terrorism, hardly 100, 200 people would be listed, despite the fact that thousands were killed in Jammu and Kashmir by the Pakistani proxies, because you would differentiate between a militant and a terrorist. So your terrorist may be my hero and vice versa. That's where, after Operation Parakaram, when the United States again played a very important role in de-escalating the matter, because at that time US was fighting war in Afghanistan, US needed Pakistan on the other front to tackle the Taliban, and that is how they decided, let's have ceasefire. And that was for the first time that fences were allowed to be constructed, because before that fences were not allowed to be constructed, and that put a lot of limitations on the cross-border infiltration. And after that we have seen declining instances of terrorism. And let's not forget, even the Naxal-affected areas reduced during the considerably during
But you
that
also have to understand, this is not only something which is our doing. Had there not been what I consider tectonic shift in terms of world's understanding of the problem of terrorism, there are two such incidents that I think have changed the world stance. One was 9/11. That is for the first time that they realized that terrorism is not a law and order problem. Earlier, whenever we used to suffer from terrorism, they would say it is a law and order problem, that we are not able to police our region well. And second was the London bombing. These two events, they basically changed the mindset of a lot of people regarding how to treat this terrorist activities. And that is where, when all of them had linkages coming from the hub, mothership of Pakistan, and after that, subsequently, Osama bin Laden being found there, then the head of Taliban, all of them being found in the region of Pakistan. You had the entire Quetta group of Taliban. So over a period of time, the world has also been sensitized about what is actually going on in Pakistan.
Interior Minister of Afghanistan, Haqqani, part of the Haqqani network, who has 20 million bounty, US bounty on his head. Supported by Pakistan.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think this is where the statement of Pakistani defense minister makes sense, where he admitted on camera
Dirty
that they have been
things
doing the dirty work for United States. Because for them, this was a proxy game, a geopolitical game. They used terrorism from 70s, 80s.
But this is where they are incorrect as well, in terms of recalling their own history. They say that when US came, that is when we started supporting the militias, that is when Osama bin Laden, etc. came in. But the research shows that the first support which happened from Pakistan in terms of the militias and the terrorists in Afghanistan, that dates back
as well.
At the time since Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto reactivated the concept of strategic depth, which was kept in abeyance ever since the Britishers withdrew from India. So Britishers deployed this entire concept of strategic depth, using Afghanistan as the strategic depth. That you
Against Russia.
Against Russia.
And it's not just on the Western front. On the Eastern front, when East Pakistan existed, Pakistan was already involved in backing Northeast insurgents. Be it the Naga National Council, the Mizo National Front. They were sheltered in East Pakistan, armed in East Pakistan. So this was before the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets. This was before 1979.
And there are lots of videos that you see online, DIY, do it yourself. Was it our DIY war, where there were at least few countries which stood firmly behind Pakistan, China, Azerbaijan, Turkey? Other countries did not condemn what Pakistan has done, explicitly naming it. But there was hardly any country which stood by us.
So I think this is a test bed for India as well, in diplomacy, in military tactics. With regard to military operations, as we discussed, Indian forces have done phenomenally well. But in diplomacy, I think we still have a lot of lessons to learn.
Despite spending heavily on diplomacy.
For example, look at the narrative management, which we were just discussing. If Pakistan is able to convince the audience, the international audience, why can't we? Despite putting so many resources behind it. I think this has to be a learning lesson for Indian diplomacy as well, that we need to get better at narrative management, create assets in other countries who can be influencers for India, raise India's viewpoint, raise India's perspective.
In fact, I would argue other ways. You are saying that we have invested heavily in terms of diplomatic outreach.
We have not.
We have not.
Of late, I'm saying in the last decade, at least under the Modi
we
government.
are heavily, in a way, undermanned in our terms of diplomatic outreach as compared to what many smaller countries have.
Not
For
really,
example,
So we need more IFS officers.
we need more IFS officers, increase the number of seats every year in civil
Correct,
services.
that is there. But if you look at India's outreach, let's say with US senators, US congressmen, there are a lot of US elected representatives who stand with India, but behind the scenes.
Or is it part of the nuclear blackmail? We'll support you everywhere, but here, hands off.
Could be, yeah. That could be the risk factor for them.
But it also shows what you talked about, coming of age of India as a country. You see, 2 decades back, this situation, if it would have emerged on the ground, we would have looked at West with a kind of an expectant eye that lend us some support.
Then how do you, if you look at the social media again, counter this narrative that 1971, Indira Gandhi, she also faced pressure from United States. There was the US 7th Fleet which was coming to the rescue of Pakistan. Even then we fought, yes, with the Russian help, but we dismembered Pakistan and split it into...
I think it's unfair to compare 71 with 2025.
Right.
Then it was a divided world.
Not in terms of the situation, obviously situation is different, but in terms of not succumbing to the pressures of global community.
Maybe it could be because India had invested enough effort in building the non-aligned movement, taking an independent stance. But now in a globalized, connected world, things are different.
There's no globalization now. You are
India still needs US. Yes. India would still need Western powers, mainly for trade, for economic reasons. So that creates a pressure factor.
And even in 1971, we have to keep in mind, almost an year was spent in building that diplomatic goodwill. It did not happen overnight, that today you launched an offensive in East Pakistan and the world stands with you. No. You had all the diplomats, including the Prime Minister, traveling to various different areas, different parts of the globe, giving the interviews.
But she didn't receive the support from the world.
No, but
in fact, we were not self-sufficient in food. Yeah. Even then, we faced the refugee crisis and we supported the refugees as well.
So that was a kind of a military offensive that now we know.
My question is simple. Why did we agree, if at all, it was a US brokered ceasefire? Why did we agree and let Donald Trump take the credit?
Yeah, I think this was the biggest diplomatic.
Although the point is that we say that it was something that the Director General of Military Operations from Pakistan reached out to the DGMO in India.
That could have just been formality. After the push from US, from Marco Rubio, then Pakistan would be pushed to make the call.
And just a day before, the US Vice President is saying this is none of our business.
Yeah. And there are reports that J.D. Vance spoke to Prime Minister Modi Modi. So that could have created pressure as well. But again, did India succumb? I think it looks like it.
I think that, first of all, Donald Trump being Donald Trump. Any other US president would have been in his place. He would not have declared it on Truth Social earlier.
For that, you just have to watch that video, how Barack Obama announces the killing of Osama bin Laden and how Donald Trump announces the killing of Baghdadi.
And also maybe Trump is pushing himself for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Nobel Peace Prize. He wanted to be the Pope.
I think he's much bigger than that.
No, I mean, he's not even kidding. When he says, I would want to be the Pope, I wouldn't be surprised if he
wants to be the president for the third time, which constitutionally he can't. But
so look,
there is no end to the expectations of Donald Trump.
He saw this as an opportunity. Yeah. He's an opportunistic individual. His character says that.
So he failed in Ukraine. He wanted to take a credit here.
Failed in Gaza as well. He had promised that I would resolve Russia-Ukraine war in 24 hours, which is not happening. So he saw an opportunity. He latched onto it and tried to push.
Wants to be the mediator in chief and the peacemaker in South Asia, which I don't think India will accept. India has maintained its stance to be very clear, but then again, I would use the term.
Then how do you make sense of this statement that both sides have agreed to talk about other issues at a neutral
location?
But I don't think that is happening anytime soon. If that happens, you see, eventually you want your neighbor to rest, at least so that we have a growth story to talk about.
But what happened that we reached to this?
So as per the reports which are pouring out from CNN, and mind you, these reports have got into the granular details and changed ever so slightly in the past 48 hours. So
was there a nuclear blackmail?
There was a kind of a blackmail, not at the level of nuclear, but at the level of deployment of ballistic weapons and ballistic missiles. When ballistic missiles are deployed, then it is a kind of a guessing game, because
Pakistan did. They used the Fatah missiles.
But they did not deploy the MIRVs, the Mervings that they have, where one ballistic missile will have multiple warheads which come in. So that is where Pakistan was looking at to escalate it 4 to 5 rungs up the escalation ladder. India said that we will respond in kind and we will respond with a greater force.
But then we had much more to lose.
We have much more to lose at any point of time. And that is where, as the reports are pouring in, that J.D. Vance asked Indian side that is there a possibility of, again, the term off-ramp for Pakistan?
That is what brings me to the earlier question that I asked. How will then Operation Sindoor act as a deterrent to Pakistan?
See, that's why
because the cost imposed this time has been much higher than what Pakistan has
They were
faced till now.
willing to launch ballistic missiles.
Next time, basically, we won't be allowing them to even get into the stage of launching the ballistic missiles.
See, I think
We have the prowess to do
I think
that.
will it stop?
Let's look at it this way. Pakistan knew that there is going to be an Indian retaliation to Pahalgam. They must have already prepared for it. So tomorrow, before launching an attack of the kind that we saw in Pahalgam, and let's not forget, Pahalgam was not an individual, independent event. Just a year before, there was an attack in Riyasi. Same template, Hindu pilgrims being targeted. So they may do it again.
So the sense I get is maybe this was part of a larger game plan. Maybe Pakistan wanted this to happen. Why? We discussed this in the last podcast as well. One, US has been largely not involved between India and Pakistan over Kashmir. Trump had made it clear that he has no business to get involved between India and Pakistan. And this is to the disadvantage of the Pakistani establishment. So they wanted a third party to be involved. They wanted American attention to be drawn. And maybe Riyasi, as you said, was the first attempt. They didn't succeed. Pahalgam probably was the next attempt. And they knew that there would be an Indian response.
Because that's what IRA told Margaret Thatcher. We have to succeed only once.
Yeah.
You have to succeed each time.
So that's where I think if you look at the larger picture, the strategic picture, maybe India has lost. Why? India has a very clear position not to get third parties involved, not to internationalize the Kashmir issue. So my concern is, have we played into the trap that Pakistan had laid? Eventually, US has been dragged into it. And US will not leave this because now Trump is invested into it. Tomorrow, if something else happens,
He's a maverick. He can
But
get
Trump
out
did
of this
that
at
in
any
the
point in
first term
time.
itself. Remember when Imran Khan went to meet Donald Trump, he was sitting there casually as
but
if
then
evening
the
tea.
circumstances were different. India pushed back. India rejected any kind of US involvement. But now we have accepted the role of the US.
But here you
No,
have to...
we have not accepted
Not
the role of the
officially.
US.
But reports clearly indicate that there was a reach out from India as well to Saudis, to Turkey, and the US. So
Saudi foreign minister, deputy foreign minister
Visiting
was
both
here.
countries.
Iranian foreign minister
Yeah.
was here.
Yeah, that's
And
not
then
a
they went to
coincidence.
Pakistan.
And we also have to be a bit practical in the sense that the visit by the Saudis and the Iranians, that is not always only to broker peace. This is also to project themselves as a larger player in the region. That is where the Iranian efforts
Saudis
were.
do have leverage. With
Saudis
both.
have
Not
leverage.
Iranians, but Saudis do.
But
used to
UAE
have-
did not.
UAE did not.
UAE
Yeah.
used to have a lot of leverage.
Yeah.
Qatar used to have a lot of leverage. It was a new thing that we saw this time, that their leverage reduced ever so slightly, but Saudis came to the front. And
Or was it also because since Saudi is involved, Iran also wants to get involved,
but-
so that Shia, Sunni.
But again, if you take a larger point of view, look at where Saudi's stance used to be a couple of decades back. It would be completely antagonistic to India. Whatever Pakistan would say, they would mouth off the same thing. Now this has changed. And we also have to understand that whether it acts as a deterrence or not, look at the pattern. Earlier, you used to have attacks, terrorists backed by Pakistan, attacking all over the region of India. Now, 26/11 was again a tectonic shift, because that was for the first time that the international community completely formed an opinion against what Pakistan is doing. So they went
That was
silent.
again largely because Americans and Europeans were
Yes,
targeted.
they were targeted. So they understood that this is a kind of a dangerous game. We can be targeted as well. After that, Pakistan resorted to small-scale destruction in the cities, again, not helping themselves. Then look at the modern, in the past decade, Pathankot. Now, Pathankot, outside the region and crossing the international boundary. Now, again, there was a backlash, Uri. So they were concentrating initially, concentrating across the country, then eventually restricting themselves to the region of LOC. That is where Pakistan's ability to take the hit has been reduced over a period of time. And that is where us raising the threshold has shown them that it can be very punitive.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot on the deterrent value of these strikes. Let's come back to Pahalgam. The 4 terrorists who perpetrated and carried out this attack, they're still not arrested. What about the intelligence failure or the security failure?
Security failure.
Intelligence as well?
Intelligence, absolutely. Security starts with intelligence.
Because ever since there was normalization in J&K, at least the so-called normalization, there have been reports that Pakistan has been planning something big. And not having security forces on the ground in high-value locations like, let's say, Baisaran, which is remote. You know it's a difficult-to-reach area. That's exactly where you deploy your troops. not having a single
This was also a time of Amarnath Yatra.
Amarnath Yatra. Tourism season picks up right now. And it was a huge lapse.
And absolute lack of human intelligence in terms of their movement
Of
post carrying out that attack. That also tells you that the security and the intelligence grid which is laid on the ground, that has got some gaps.
And over the last 5 years, the grid in J&K has been dispersed and weakened. Yes. Because first we got distracted with China in
LAC.
Ladakh. Then the attacks happened in Jammu sector. We got diverted there, maybe leaving a gap in Kashmir.
Yes, and that is a terrain we talked about in the last podcast as well. Very difficult terrain. I think you'll be able to talk better about it. Now, that is a terrain where one valley leads to another, all of them densely forested and separated by very high altitude mountains. So it is not easy to simply move from one region to another. And someone sitting at a high altitude has an advantage where they can see the advancing troops. So they can always move very swiftly, and they can eventually
Go back through the line of control.
through the region of Karakoram.
Hide as
Karakoram
well.
heights, they come into play at that particular region. And mind you, all the terrorists that Pakistan deploys in this region, they have a proficiency in mountain warfare.
Yeah.
Now,
They are given
militaries-
military grade training.
Yes, one of the individuals who has carried this out, he was of special ops of Pakistan. So they have that training of high altitude mountain warfare. So it is very easy for them to mingle into the heights of Karakoram and then get lost
also-
So
forever.
there was a security intelligence failure,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
that we have still not been able to capture these terrorists. Speaks volumes about our preparedness.
100%. And let's not forget, it was not just foreign terrorists who were involved. There were locals as well. Maybe we can give an excuse that our intelligence has lapses in Pakistan, but what about in Kashmir? If you can't keep track of OGWs, if you can't track local supporters and intercept local communication, then that is a big gap in your intelligence as well.
The only worry is that it should not lead to a complete opposite of a very hard crackdown on the local
Not on the local population,
Because whenever this happens, Public Safety Act, etc., they are invoked ruthlessly. Our experience has indicated that it has always germinated that kind of a sense of separatism amongst many, owing to the atrocities that they have faced. And that gives rise to more sleeper cells which can be exploited by Pakistan. Pakistan is always on the lookout, and their ultimate aim and dream is to divide India, to break India. So that is where they're looking for these kind of cracks. So I would say
This was, again, I'll reiterate the point that I made in the last podcast. This event, however unfortunate, that doesn't mean that this is the ultimate failure of the intelligence. I think we can safely say that we have defeated terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir to a large extent. And that cannot be possible without the local support as well.
Yes.
Which means local intelligence, human intelligence, you are gathering. That's how you are able to thwart various terrorist instances. And let's not forget, one unfortunate event has taken place, but look at how many unfortunate events have we thwarted, which we may not get to know because we thwarted it, didn't happen. But let's look at, towards the end, let's look at the political ramifications of this. What do you think of Mr. Modi as the Prime Minister? Has he come out stronger or weaker after this conflict?
I think it's a mixed bag. Stronger on one side because the intent was clearly shown right from day one that India would hit back, that there would be a cost that Pakistan will have to pay, and giving a free hand to the armed forces, and showing the guts, the willingness to scale up the escalatory ladder despite the nuclear threshold. I think that speaks volumes about his leadership. But I do have a problem with him not coming out and delivering a reassurance message, especially during those 4 critical days, and instead allowing officials to deliver the narrative. Maybe that's where we lost the Western attention as well.
Maybe that's how it should be done. Let the generals, let the professionals deal with the situation rather than taking political credit for what the army has done.
Not the credit, at least to explain what's happening on the ground or explain what is India's
Or are
intent.
you alluding to or referring to the speech given by Pakistani Prime Minister after the ceasefire was announced where he declared triumph?
That any day gets more attention if it comes directly from the mouth of the leader. I think things would have been better
Or
if, let's
maybe
say,
call out another all-party meeting and
meeting
discuss.
as well, and keep the opposition on board. Take the opposition on board as
Don't
well.
treat
which
them
has-
as enemies.
Exactly, and that has not happened.
one thing before we go into this, one thing I would like to probe into. What do you think are the learnings that India militarily has to gain from Operation Sindoor, where we need to improve? Because every such operation is a learning mechanism as well.
I think first there has to be a look at the losses, the reports of fighter jets being shot down. If advanced 4.5 generation fighters like Rafales have been downed, was there a tactical mistake or was there a technical issue with the flight itself?
The S-400s were switched off at that point of time when Indian planes
And
were
also,
in the
don't
air.
forget the strike packages would have gone silent. They would have gone radio silent, switched off their electronic signatures as well. So maybe there should be a relook at the tactics, at the equipment we are procuring, because we are looking at procuring more Rafales, the marine variant. So how does this impact the deal that we have recently signed
And
with
losses
France?
also should not be demoralizing as well.
Yeah, it need
because
not be.
if let's give the cricket analogy again,
Yeah.
you want to win a cricket match, but that doesn't mean you will not be hit for a six or a boundary,
Yeah, you
or
lose
you
wickets
won't
as
lose
well.
wickets either.
Yeah, exactly. So we should be accepting of the losses. I don't think it's a matter of pride or a loss of prestige.
I think this operation for the first time has made losses acceptable for the masses as well. Because mind you, prior to this, when a MiG was down during the Balakot operation, there was a large-scale public shock that what happened? How can they take down our plane? This time,
No, I think it is because the expectations that you set. You treat the enemy as so inferior that they are not able to. They're not capable of killing a bird.
And in fact, the military, the chief of air staff, all of them have been talking about this relentlessly for the past 2 to 3 years, conveying this directly and indirectly to the masses that losses do happen. We have to be okay with
That was a
facing that
beautiful
loss.
statement made by the Navy chief yesterday, where he said that we are there to kill, not count the body bags.
Also, do you think losses have become more acceptable to the masses because conflict has been normalized in the last few years?
But I don't think loss to the Air Force planes, if at all that is true, would be acceptable to the common
The
public.
good thing is that we have all the pilots who are safe and sound.
That's what matters at the end of the day.
There is a greater investment that you do on a pilot. That is the much costlier asset than what a hardware is. So you want those pilots to be safe. So that is a good thing which comes out. And we also have to improve our network-centric warfare. It has come of age, but to a greater extent. The very fact that on 7th of May, when we supposedly lost those fighters, our air defense mechanism was switched off with the fear that we might hit one of our 80 planes.
Which has happened in the past.
Which has happened
Yes.
during the time of Balakot.
Right.
So we were still fearful of that. And that basically, again, brings focus on indigenization.
I think
of
that's a
this.
big lesson as well. There was a hesitation on the side of the armed forces to procure indigenous equipment. Like Aakash itself, if you hear the recent statement by the lead scientist of Aakash, who was one of the prodigies of Abdul Kalam, he clearly states Indian Army was hesitant. Indian Air Force were hesitant to buy Aakash. But now it has performed phenomenally well in the battlefield. So I think we need to double down on indigenous defense equipment.
And also, this also vindicates our stance where we went completely against the entire Western military industrial complex. They were hell-bent on convincing India not to procure
S-400s.
And there would be endless amount of media reports pressuring about...
The US threatened with sanctions, secondary sanctions.
Let's not forget, it was an Indian-American, Ro Khanna, who brought in a bill in House of Representatives to exempt India from NATSA.
Yes.
That speaks volumes also about the investment that we have to make for diaspora and respect.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was discussing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, one of the learnings that I would say is controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
You see, this was a 3-day, 4-day event. Generally, the escalation ladder, when it starts going up, we saw in Kargil, it went ahead for around 2 months' time. When you have that long a conflict, maybe the next conflict is not limited to 3 days, it goes for 10 days and beyond. You have to be able to control the narrative. That is very, very important. Even if you face losses, it is okay. As long as you appear to be in control.
But what if it demoralizes the forces?
No, you don't have to accept or you don't have to say that, oh my God, 5 planes have been down, now I don't know what to do. But you need to have that calibrated response. What we are seeing from yesterday and in fact, day before yesterday also, the military responses, the press conferences that are being made.
The information management has become much better since yesterday compared to the last 4 days.
Yes. So that is something where we have to
Since
capture
yesterday, so you're talking about 11th of May.
Day before yesterday, I would say. Yeah.
Since the military commanders started delivering the messages, there is more streamlined information flow.
That needs to happen from day one.
Day one.
More frequent press briefings.
Yeah.
That is what we saw in the case of Kargil. Despite
Complete opacity.
No, not
No,
opacity.
this time there has been complete opacity. This is
time
not
it-
good for the narrative that
This
you're trying
time
to
there
build.
has been a significant bit of opacity.
Because you need to keep social media in mind. Social
Yeah.
media is at play, where a lot of disinformation.
And in
fake news is-
1962, Parliament was discussing the India-China
China war, yeah.
Prime Minister was addressing the
Yeah.
Parliament. There was a
Right.
cabinet committee on war which was
Right.
constituted.
So there has to be more transparency in information.
But
management.
somehow I'm not still in the favor of holding a parliament session during the time of the conflict. Post it, yes.
And there has to be
There has to
be.
a
Yes.
post-conflict analysis.
Post-conflict analysis has to happen.
And you have to hold the government
No,
accountable
only
as well,
then,
whatever
Yes.
lapses
Otherwise,
that
you
there
will
are.
shrug off all the failures under the carpet, and this is a
Exactly.
slippery slope.
No, even during the course of the conflict, there have been secret parliament sittings which have been held during the course of the war.
Yes, secret should be held. But what happened, for example, you saw what unfolded in Pakistan. There was a kind of a parliament meet, and it was a kind of a mockery of what was happening. You don't want that coming out of a responsible state.
No, instead of having a parliamentary session, it is better to have a closed door, all
All-party
party
meeting.
meeting
Definitely.
that would serve a larger purpose.
Yes, because there has to be an accountability.
And you have to appear that the nation is united behind the armed forces because they're doing their spectacular job.
Absolutely true.
With this, we have come to the end of this thoughtful discussion. If you have got benefited from the conversation that we had, do let us know your thoughts in the comment section. And Jai Hind. Lack of consistency, declining motivation, fear of answer writing. These are the challenges that civil services aspirants face daily. To handhold serious candidates, make them mains ready, and inculcate discipline in their preparation, we have launched a path-breaking online classroom program called Unacademy Platinum. This is your one-stop destination to crack IAS in first attempt, where India's top educators will be guiding and mentoring you personally. I'm here to invite you to experience Unacademy Platinum for free. Register for the free experience session now, and together, let's crack it.